have a little look. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our attraction workshop. Thank you very much for joining us this morning and giving us your time. I know that it's a particularly busy time of year as we move into the new early careers recruitment season. So for those that don't know me, and I think there are many of you, my name is Sue Hadley, and I have been managing attraction campaigns with Amberjack for over 12 years now. In that time, we have successfully managed in excess of 150 campaigns, helping clients attract the best in student talent, be that apprentices, interns, or graduates. Today, I'm going to be joined by a number of guest panelists that I'll introduce properly in a short while. But first, I wanted to provide a bit of context around why this workshop is happening, and by way of a little introduction to the session as well. So for around about 10 years, Amberjack have produced an annual market insights report looking at the world of early careers recruitment. And if you haven't seen Amberjack Insights before, you will be emailed after today's session with a link to our resource hub, where you can download a copy and access a number of other resources there as well. Have a good look round while you're in there. The 2022 Insights report saw us have a look at for those, I should be sharing this slide. Good. The 2022 Insights report saw us get responses from over 95 different employers across 30 different sectors and an insight into over 300,000 candidate applications. So a really good data pool there for us to draw some results from. And one of the questions that was asked of employers was, what were the key recruitment challenges in the 2021-22 season for you? And as you can see there from the graph on the left, a little over 50% of respondents said that attraction was one of their biggest challenges this last season, making it the second most challenging aspect across the season across all employers. We've not seen attraction feature in the top 5 of challenges before, so after a mild panic, we set about trying to get under the skin of what that really meant. Was it quality of applicants? Was it rising costs? Was it engagement at events? And I'll talk some more about some of the further insights that we've been able to draw as we've pursued putting this workshop together. We wanted to make sure that the workshop wasn't just an Amberjack voice as an RPO, but brought together some insights from other media partners and universities to make sure you can get the best hints and tips on the market that will help you shape your candidate attraction as you go into the new season. What we can really learn from each other today, what's challenging in the market, what's changing in the market, and how can we tackle that. So I'm going to introduce you, or I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves. We've got 5 joining us today. If I might start with Andrew from King's College, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Wright. I'm the Associate Director for Employer Engagement and Work-Based Learning at King's College London. We're an institution of about 45,000 students with 9 faculties covering pretty much every discipline you can imagine. And of course, we work with lots and lots of employers and lots of suppliers to help facilitate all the work we do.
Thank you. Rory, we'll go left to right.
Thanks, Sue, and thank you for having me. So, hi everyone, my name is Rory. I'm a client partner at RMP Enterprise, where our mission is to inspire young people to take the first step in their career. So we support young people aged 16 to 24 in finding apprenticeship, intern and graduate opportunities. But today I'm focusing specifically on placements and internships, which is sort of representing our flagship brand, RateMyPlacement, which is powered by 70,000 reviews written from undergraduates.
Thanks, Rory.
Oh, amazing. Can you guys hear me still?
Yes, all good.
Excellent, nice. Hi everyone, I'm Shelly. Really lovely to be here. So I am part of Wright Network, and we are a free to join careers platform for students and graduates across the UK. We've got about a 700,000 member network, so supporting really across the UK to help students to build the skills that they need and connect with the employers that they need to connect with in order to build fantastic careers. I am the B2C marketing lead. So what that means is I work with our members to help them develop those skills and connect with those employers and become the candidates of the future.
Hi everybody, my name's Chris. I'm the Managing Director of the Ad Solutions division within Careerpass Network. So more specifically, I look after graduatejobs.com as a brand, gradtouch.com as a brand, and another service we have which is called Campus, which reaches out to different societies and helps you engage. I guess over that time, what we are really is the coalface of attraction for employers, kind of large and small, far and wide, and bits like that. So hopefully what we've seen over the years is going to be really valuable to share from a trend perspective, definitely in terms of attraction being a larger challenge than it has maybe in the past.
Thanks, Chris.
Hi everyone, and I'm Tom. I work for Amazing Apprenticeships. We're an organisation who work to improve understanding and awareness around apprenticeships nationally. We work to that end with about 4,500 schools and FE colleges nationwide. It's about 3/4 of the total, very closely with government to deliver national campaigns, and also with around about 1,000 employers helping to connect them to that schools audience and that potential apprentice pipeline.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, everyone, actually, for joining us today, and not only just delegates, but obviously all our panel members. I'm hoping for a lively discussion. Let's see how we go. We did do a short follow-up survey to Insights to get under the skin of what the challenges around attraction were, and it's enabled us to focus on 3 themes, which we're going to cover today. Candidate quality and quantity, content and storytelling, and budget and resource. I think Emily's put a little note in the chat just to say if you have any questions as we go, please do feel free to put them in the chat. And we've allowed some time at the end to make sure that you've got an opportunity to ask those questions of our panelists. So we will get started then. I will just stop sharing, and we can get into our first question. So firstly, we wanted to take a little look at candidate quality and quantity. So 50% of respondents to our surveys showed that quantity of candidates was an issue. 43.5% said that they saw a reduction of up to 40% of candidate applications on the previous season. So I was going to throw a first question out to Chris at Graduate Jobs to ask if there were any candidate themes or trends over the past 12 months that could be impacting on candidate quality and volumes of applications.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sid. Yeah, I guess the first bit is just having to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour to last season to understand where we were in 2020. And we're all in a panic and hopefully never again and then go into something like that. But some of the really obvious trends that we saw then in terms of candidate activity on our websites was massively increased at a time when jobs were massively decreased at the same time. So in any supply and demand situation, you're going to find with less jobs and more candidates with a more urgent need to do what they do, they're going to naturally behave differently and do more. I think that then very interestingly, when you compare year on year, last year, I think everybody went into the year with an expectation. There was 2 cohorts, numbers were on the rise, and we'd learned lots actually. Some of these clients that the previous year would be able to sort of jump into the market, get what they needed and get back out, felt that they found a solution as well. And maybe that didn't quite come through last year. So we saw a similar peak between September and November, just not to the same level. So it was the same behaviour, but probably about 25 to 30% down. So it's exactly the same trend, just lower and doing that. That carried all the way through to Jan. But then what we actually saw about March time last year was this year actually overtook last year. So it tells us there was a very big delay in terms of people making their applications as well in terms of that. So that seasonality seems like it dragged out for a much longer period. we actually ran a survey ourselves as part of a candidate temperature check. So we interviewed over 2,000 students and graduates in February and March, and of which 87% of those fell within kind of the key years, so 2022 and 2021 graduates. And 40% of them had told us that in March this year that they'd focused on their education and weren't applying for jobs yet. Actually, it's even more, and I know diversity comes in there to this, and budget, this probably covers all of that, that at the same time, 58% of those were females that said by March this year they hadn't even begun their job search. And I think we've seen that quite visibly, that clients have had to kind of elongate their process, especially if you go back to, if you're trying, if gender is one of your really key areas of diversity, trying to achieve everything in October and November probably is going to have an impact on that as well. And I think that demonstrated, that was your number one, actually, above attraction. This is potentially had an impact there.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to ask. Sorry,
yeah,
Chris.
So I think that kind of hopefully sort of sums it as a bit of a trend, but how we've seen year on year, and yeah, I'm sure at some point we'll discuss sort of moving forwards as well. But as a looking back, that sums up what we saw in terms of trends on our platforms.
And Rory, did you see similar activity or similar trends around interns in the market as well?
Yeah, completely. I think we saw quite a similar trend to the way Chris has described it. I think what we found was that in the COVID year, application numbers obviously increased per candidate and the number of jobs available decreased. And then this year, we've actually seen student confidence increase again. So if we think about students' mindsets during the pandemic, it was very much low confidence in the actual jobs market as a whole, which meant candidates were applying to more roles than they typically would. They might have been applying to roles that were slightly outside of their sector, just to try and guarantee that they got some form of work experience. If you compare that to 2021-22 this year, we've actually found that, as we've seen from increasing rates of things like reneging offers, there's a lot more student confidence. So they're applying to fewer roles and being more choosy with where they want to work. We actually saw 50% more roles advertised on RateMyPlacement in this last campaign year than we had the previous year. So it shows the scale of the bounce back. But I think the most important thing we've seen from a student perspective is just the way students' confidence has been impacted. So when we look into why student confidence is low and what the barriers are to applying to roles, what we basically found is that it comes to a perceived lack of skills. And I think that's really important for employers, universities, and suppliers like us to all be aware of. So with student confidence very low and feeling like it's because of a lack of skills, I think there's more emphasis on us as an industry to come together and talk about transferable skills, and the fact that actually, you know, there are definitely ways into careers for these students they just might not be aware of.
Really interesting, and I think something that shared. I saw a lot of nodding heads around the room there in terms of that. Do the flip side in terms of quality and quantity. I think we all experienced, certainly most of our clients experienced, a sort of 200 to 300% hike in applications during the COVID year. And what was perceived to see, so as I say, 43% was saying they saw up to a 40% drop this last year. But you're right, Chris, in terms of numbers over and above. If we compare it to the previous year, 2019, 2020, most of our campaigns saw higher application numbers than that year. So if we literally pulled out the COVID year, there would be an increasing trend in terms of candidate applications for roles. So I hope that the response in terms of quantity is probably more of a blip than anything else. But flipping it and looking at the quality side, Rory, I don't know if you had any thoughts or insights in terms of how interns might play a part in talent pooling and driving candidate quality over the longer term.
Trying to find my unmute button. Yeah, completely. And I think this is where we sort of see internships and placements being absolutely vital, because if we look at why, as an industry, we've got established graduate schemes, it's to build a talent pipeline for your more senior roles that we know are harder to recruit. They can be quite resource intensive and quite expensive. So we recruit young people at graduate level so that they can be trained in the manner employers want, and it increases the quality and their impact on the business by the time they get to those senior positions. And internships and placements is just an extension of that. So when you look at, for example, candidates that have who are going to be applying for you for an internship or a placement, roughly across our sort of members and companies that work with us on RateMyPlacement, they tend to retain 56% of their interns and placement students. So if we're talking about the quality of a graduate output in sort of year one, if you have someone who's worked with the business for 12 weeks on a summer internship or a full year on an industrial placement, the quality they're going to bring in that role is really high. And so from a quality perspective, it's really beneficial. But the other factor is, as we know from the research Amberjack have produced, one of the worries at the moment is increasing rates of reneging offers. Reneging, I never know which one. But so if we give them an opportunity to have a full 12 months to experience the company first, it's not only going to increase the quality of their output, but also they're much more likely to stay within the business as well.
I think the numbers on reneges, I think 50% of respondents said that they saw an increase in the numbers of declines, withdrawn or reneged offers over the last year. So very substantial. And the other big call out in terms of quality or perceived quality was over 43% were saying that they saw less diversity in their candidate applications. And I was going to flick over to Andrew and just ask about top 3 recommendations for employers who are wanting to attract a more diverse population of students.
Yeah, and this is the topic that's on everyone's sort of to-do list, isn't it? It has been for a number of years, and I think thankfully during the pandemic we've almost doubled down in a positive way rather than it losing traction, is the reflections we're getting from the university side. I think the 3 things I would say is 1, be open to be working collaboratively. So partnering on attraction campaigns with other employers, with multiple universities. One of the things that we've learned on the higher education side over the last few years is actually collaboration has to be part of the way we move forward. So you're seeing our universities collaborate around particular event strands or themes or fairs or activities or interventions. And I think, there is some work for us to do with bringing employers together to target particular diversity characteristics around some of that. So just as one example, at King's, we're partnering with all of our other London Russell Group universities, so LSE, UCL, Queen Mary, Imperial, to do a whole strand of events over the next year, specifically focused on diversity and inclusion, because we realise that we've all got it, but actually showcasing it in isolation to potential employers, when we know that there are some fantastic universities out there who really pioneer this as part of what they do. Russell Groups aren't often seen for their diversity, but if we come together with employers, we can do that. The second is obviously, and I think this won't come as a surprise to anyone, be data driven. I think one of the things we've all seen over the pandemic as well is, we've touched on this sort of sense of panic. We've all just tried everything because we've needed to, and we've sort of spammed and hosted thousands of events and activities. And part of the perception versus reality, I think, that we've seen over the last year of challenges in quality or in engagement has been because we've all just done too much and students have been overwhelmed. So think carefully when we're looking at diversity groups about talking to the institutions, talking to the cohorts of students you're looking to target. And there's a lot of data out there that universities provide, but also from PISA, the Higher Education Statistics Agency, that will tell you, around Black, ethnic, minority groups, around disabled students, etc. We're happy to provide that. We want to provide that. And I think that will give you a greater diversity in your campaign. And the final one is be realistic and also to listen, which won't come as a surprise again, but universities have got dedicated teams. I have a fantastic team of around 20 staff who are literally here to support employers build their attraction campaigns and how to work with the institution. Now, other universities will have different varieties of how they compose that, but everyone will have an employer engagement team. We know precisely what our institutions are doing inside out. We know what's happening on the ground. We know our student demographics. So don't expect the same campaign to work everywhere. We will give you advice on how to steer it within that particular institution or that particular geography as well. And there are certain regions and things where universities are coming together to look at that. But yeah, I think be open to collaboration, be data driven, be realistic, and listen and partner with institutions as well. one of the things that's been a bit of a challenge, I think, from the university side of the last few years is we've seen obviously suppliers and employers go off and do their own things, often brilliantly, but without that support or the consultation with higher education, which has then led to some of the challenges we've had around student engagement, perception of attraction, etc.
I think that's really interesting, and music to my ears when you say use the data. That's really helpful. it's the core of how we recommend university partners. And I'm going to probably come back to you again. So there was quite a high number of employers said that they saw low event attendance at virtual events. And my question to you is probably what are students asking for in terms of employer engagement, and how are you responding to their needs?
Yeah, and I do think there is an element of perception against reality on some of that, Sue. You know, I know when I was reflecting on the report that there is this lack of quality in the candidates and lack of attraction. You know, Chris has touched on the panic. We've also heard about media reporting as well, where students have seen that the market's collapsing because of big press reports, but actually entry level and early careers talent's been pretty much, with some exception in internships and placements, still carrying on through. We didn't do what we did in 2008 and just suddenly stop dead in early careers. So we're seeing far more diversity and engagement in our events because we're a multi-faculty, multi-campus university. When we were doing things physically pre-pandemic, we could only attract students who were perhaps in that vicinity at any one time. One of the brilliant things of the last couple of years has meant that we can actually now diversify the reach of an attraction campaign on behalf of employers to different campuses virtually, to different cohorts of students with different diversity characteristics as well. But in terms of what students are wanting, yes, they want that return to physical activity. I think that's clear. There is a bit of a struggle underway right now from the higher education side as well about finding the right space in a timetable and physically on site for employers to come back. We are welcoming you back. We want you back. But we recognise that, on both sides of the equation, there are challenges with us, and there are challenges sometimes with some policies still around budgets and what you're able to do. I think the other thing is they want to hear that the experience that they've gained during the pandemic has been relevant because they've had to do things slightly differently. They haven't had that physical interaction. So they've been doing virtual work simulations and things, and they want to hear in a campaign and from potential employers that if they've been doing volunteering, if they've been doing virtual stuff, it's as relevant as doing the internship that someone did over a summer 2-3 years ago. But the 5 sort of things that we are doing to respond or sort of, I think, looking ahead to highlight in attraction campaigns would be make it meaningful. Think about stuff that's under the surface. They want to see the office. They want to hear about the realities of hybrid working. Don't shy away from it. They recognise that things are slightly different, but talk about that very openly and transparently. I think also, that honesty around diversity and where it's a challenge, don't shy away from it. There's a big piece at the moment around environmental and sustainable governance that isn't going away. Flexibility, recruitment of international students, being clued up and being transparent and open on that as well. And then the other things are again around relevancy, talking about consideration of different descriptions, think about target university. I think we're going to talk about storytelling a little bit more. But that lived experience is really, really, really key about what we are doing in terms of responding to their needs. There's a real focus on those sort of areas, and we are collaboratively working together, as I touched on before as well.
Brilliant. Chris, from a media job board side, what are your recommendations for making an impact with, for want of a better description, inventory, materials that you have available, ways that employers can get to students?
Yeah, probably I'm going to echo a lot of what Andrew just said, actually. Like, data is really key, but have a think about why you're using it as well. So when you pick inventory, something I use in my day-to-day a lot, and it is with employers as well, is what is the purpose of what you're doing? So we tie everything back down to old metrics of how many people applied though, and how many people did this. But if we're trying to use different pieces of inventory differently, accept different outcomes as a result, rather than write them off. So a piece of diversity branding is trying to maybe change something more long tail than an immediate demand for a type of candidate to apply for your job. and accept that there's endemic reasons, probably over decades, why certain backgrounds don't apply to certain industries and certain companies. You're not going to break that in 1 year. So it's about tying that in for longer. So maybe that older metric, you'd look at a piece of diversity branding now and say that was less successful than the really obvious job post we did, but that job post attracted all the people that always apply to you that actually you're trying to change in terms of your cohort. So I think that purpose is it diversity? Is it pure attraction? If it is, great. If you're trying to inform, accept that you're trying to inform and maybe change your metric around how you're using that piece of inventory and what you do. Because otherwise just applying the same set of outcomes to different bits of data is not going to give you anything consistent. I think the other thing we've learned from the last 2 years, as the old Boy Scout in me as well, is be prepared and be agile. So, and I think it comes down to that. So really strong relationships like clients would have with you, Sue, with Amberjack, like they would have with us directly as suppliers, like they would have with universities and internally as well. So internally if stakeholders but in the past we had everyone finish by the end of November, educate them in what's changed in the last couple of years and what potentially. So we've discussed about the COVID year. Actually, all of those students had 2 years worth of their university affected by that and now walking into a cost of living crisis as they enter work now. We've just commissioned a survey that we were just going through the findings yesterday, so it'll be out in the next couple of weeks. And people are having to change their desired location or their desired sectors, their desired salaries, their attitude to hybrid working is going to be very different to the attitude to hybrid working of existing workforces and how they feel they're going to get out of it and what they're going to do. So as we say goodbye to one challenge, along comes another one. Are we fully prepared for what implications that might be or what you need to get across? So I guess that remaining prepared and staying as agile as you can and as flexible to everything. Just unfortunately, we can't carry out the same processes that we did in some of these years that we talk about being a challenge in the mid-10s, when actually they were probably like for like over 4 or 5 years now. And now we've had 3 years of very substantially different challenges and behaviours.
Absolutely right. And I think actually you've led quite well into our next section to have a look at creative content and storytelling. And have a look at how we get those messages across and we dovetail into what students are looking for in an engaged way through the content that we're able to put out there. So I was going to ask Shelly, perhaps if you can tell us a little bit about what your community is responding to well, because over 30% of our employer respondents said that they saw less engaged candidates. So how can we get in front of them? What do they want to hear? And what can we do with our content?
Absolutely. And I think there's been some themes that have come up in the conversation already that tie into this really well. But if I had to summarize it into 2 key things that are really important, it's really that personalization element and being experience led. So going into personalization, really fine-tuning content to closely address their needs and wants and making use of those wider data points and all the kind of information we're building on these candidates and the candidate market itself, especially where we have similar data across different types of members, to really pinpoint those needs that they don't know that they want as well and cultivating that into content. So we really utilize this strategy in terms of creating tools and content that empowers members and the communities as they explore. So helps us to better understand what they want before they even know what they want, so that we can create the tools that help them to explore us a bit more and understand what we can offer and where we can support and where they fit. So that's kind of the personalization element. And it also just helps to really, in a tangible and experiential way, show them how they fit into this employer or this brand, by understanding, okay, this content speaks directly to me and is personalized for me because of these key needs and wants I have. And actually, I'm already bought in that way by having content that isn't just copy paste for all. Second part is being experience led. So that really harkens to that non-transactional, non-promote kind of content. We're not always just trying to get them to do something, even though yes, we are. We want you to apply. We want you to do the CTA or the call to action, but really creating experiences where they feel part of something beforehand, that makes them better primed to take an action. So through our social content, for example, a heavy part is being focused on being advice led, even in the promotion post. So if we're trying to get people to come to an event or to explore some of our key employer partners, it's always with the leading with the messaging of this is how we build your advice and knowledge of the sector, or helping you to address a question that you've got, rather than we need you to take this action for us. And I think often social and certain channels, I think we do better with this as an industry with things like email perhaps, but particularly through social content, it can lead to be very, very transactional. And this is something that a lot of platforms are moving away from, especially now that social media is much more of a recommendations kind of algorithmic tool, where it's based on, okay, where do their friends or similar types of users, what things are they engaged with? Okay, we'll put more content towards them that is like that. It's more about that building that trust and kind of creating something that they feel part of. So those are the two key things that I would kind of put forward, being personalized and being experience led.
And I think that reflects some of the things that Rory was saying about trying to give more skills and experience and, you know, depth of information rather than, you know, purely transactional messages.
Exactly.
And I don't want to lose track of apprentices. So probably a similar question for you, Tom, as well, from an amazing apprenticeship side. Can you tell us what your community is responding to in terms of content? What's working for the school and college leavers?
I mean, the short answer is always video, isn't it? But there's obviously huge sort of budgetary considerations attached to that. I know is an issue for lots of people. Sort of thematically, I guess the big thing from an apprenticeships point of view is the understanding that people generally come to the decision to do an apprenticeship later than they come to the decision to go into work or go into university, particularly looking at that sort of 16 to 18-year-olds school leaver demographic. That's our sort of real strong suit. The result of that is that apprentice pipeline can be even shakier, even more reactive for employers. So much more responsive in some ways to current and upcoming sort of economic, social, geopolitical, all of the stuff that that Chris and others have touched on today, the sort of rocky stuff. So as a result of that, I think sort of trust in the system and trust in employment can be a challenge. So building that trust and building that authenticity is key for apprenticeship employers. And we see people responding really, really well in schools and colleges to the kind of content and the kind of messaging that helps build that trust. I think also very briefly, it's also important to remember that both teachers and parents and carers are sort of very, very influential voices at that age. So also creating content that builds trust and speaks to those people and to their concerns as well. So young people, 16 to 18-year-olds ish, they're sort of savvy, they're natives in the space, they're overexposed to online content and underexposed to how most employers speak. So they are prone to viewing a lot of messaging as sort of fluff and nonsense and noise. As a result of that, like Shelly's touched on, I think that sort of personalization, sort of hyper relevant information. Think about what it is that they don't know yet, and what they don't know, they don't know. No one knows what an assessment centre is when they're 16, and employers are terrible at just sort of taking a step back and going, we should probably explain what this means before we start getting into it. But yeah, I mean, again, more broadly, apprentice voice, representative voices, touching on that D&I point that we've already mentioned, sort of non-filtered, authentic feeling, trustworthy content, and also prospects. So what is on offer beyond the immediate apprenticeship, both in terms of when they're on program, what exists sort of peripherally within the business, whether that's employee support networks or, I don't know, away days, other experiences, what's going on around them, but also prospects in terms of what comes after the apprenticeship, because in rocky economic times, when young people are feeling a lack of trust in that whole system, that little bit of certainty and security lands really, really well. And as I sort of touched on a little frivolously at the beginning, video is a great way of communicating a lot of that stuff. But there are other ways of doing it. There are more budget friendly ways of doing it for people for whom that's a concern.
And regarding the influencer side of things, we spoke about student influencers, we're talking about parents, guardians, tutors, etc. Over the past, well, maybe not even over the past 12 months, in terms of trends, have you seen a change in trends around the apprentice market? So that they do have more insight, they do have more of a handle on what an apprenticeship is and how to communicate that better. Because I think that's always been a past criticism, that we don't talk about apprentices in the same way that we do graduates in university.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I mean, in a lot of ways, that is always the great challenge underpinning everything that we do. We work very closely with employers around their specific messaging, but really the big challenge is still, how do you get the overall message into schools when teachers are as time pressed as they are, and they're not going to go away and do the research themselves, and schools are very geared towards UCAS and geared towards funneling people into full-time work or into university. But I think there's much more of an understanding, and we're doing a bit of research at the moment, which I'll share with you when it's done, actually around how the pandemic bounce back has affected perceptions of apprenticeships and awareness of apprenticeships versus other career routes. So yeah, it's information I don't have to hand yet, but I'll share it once I do, and you're welcome to distribute it.
Thank you so much. And we're going to move on in a moment to talk about budget and resource, but I'm going to filter the budget question into here and ask Shelly a little question around content specifically. I think nearly 50% of our respondents to the main insight survey suggested that their budget is under £50,000. That doesn't, you know, for many of us who know about our high volume requirements, that doesn't always go very far. So, you know, what are some top tips about how to create content for those of us that can't go out and perhaps put on a full photo shoot or a full video shoot? What sort of things can we get involved in?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Tom has already started to kind of pull some of the key themes I'll mention here. But I think first and foremost is like remembering authenticity as like as a starting point when creating content. So students and candidates and graduates, they want content they can trust and engage with. And as I said about like kind of social algorithms and things like that, they're leaning more and more towards those recommendations based kind of content and looking at that as the steer for, okay, this is what I should be looking at, this is what I should be paying attention to. So showing them what they would most likely like or engage with is where they're going to build their trust. I know a lot of brands and employers are starting to play around with new platforms, things like TikTok now, and kind of playing around with those video kind of bite-sized kind of video formats. And I see a lot of employers and brands spending a lot of money and time in equipment into kind of making these really standout brand films, because that's what we're used to doing, especially in kind of marketing teams. We're used to trying to do things the best and make it look shiny and everything like that. But actually, when it comes to students and graduates and the sort of content they engage with best, it's really about scaling that right back and just thinking about how to be authentic to that channel and authentic to what it is that those students are trying to get from the information as much as possible. We don't need to do too much. If I look at our best performing content on Wright Network, especially on our social media channels, and this goes across to emails as well, is when we're really sharing about what's happening with things like the team and images from our events, where employers and students are actually physically connecting and they can see that, rather than the graphics we spent hours creating with the designer or kind of getting people on board to come in and kind of create a massive video. It's those ones that do the best kind of day to day, and those ones really capture in an authentic way what we're all about and what we do and how we can actually support. So I think it's focus on authenticity and not to overlook that for having something shiny and looking polished and looking amazing, because that content this kind of fast consumed content will move on quite quickly, and you'll have put all that money in to have pretty much the same impact as if you just made a video with your team. I'm
going to throw a question out into the mix just whilst we talk about polished content versus authenticated content. Yeah. I think we have a highly established market in the UK, and there is a lot of awards around polished and finished campaigns and the creative concepts that go into those. Will this drive a change in the way that we look at those things? Because I know that a lot of employers struggle with the balance between having the fancy, shiny, polished campaign and actually having a more targeted, realistic, diverse campaign focused on data. They're two very different things when it comes to external gloss. So, and that's probably a question for all the guys on the panel, really, whether we will see some change here, and should we be looking at change?
I think to kick off, I guess the answer, or one of the answers, I think that there is room. Well, I think first and foremost, the data side of things, making it polished in that way and like making sure that it's always data-led content is never going to change. I think it always needs to be a key feature feeding into it. But in terms of being more flexible and adaptable, I think there is a growing room for that, and how mainly led by the fact that how brands in general, not just employers, engage with consumers is changing and adapting and spreading, and how consumers expect to be, if we call them consumers, I guess, if we're talking to students and graduates, how they're expecting brands to engage with them is shifting. And so with that, there is a lot more playroom than there ever has been before. And I think it really is understanding who your audience is and who you're trying to reach, so these students and graduates, and understanding how they want to engage with you, because and then that will show you where that kind of playroom is. And it's something that we've been playing around with a lot lately, and actually it's shown us just how wide we can actually, students are looking for us to kind of play with that kind of those comms that they're getting and kind of make it more interesting and new beyond what they've seen before, because I think there is this kind of content fatigue that's happening where they see the same sorts of posts, the same sorts of engagement, same sorts of emails from every brand, every employer, and they want something different. They want a conversation, they want an experience, and playing around with how we do that is going to be more and more important as time goes on to keep that differentiation.
It's Rory. I don't know if I'm conscious of time, but I don't know if you have anything to chip in on that subject.
No, I completely agree with what Shelly said. I mean, as a business, we are focused on peer-led content, right? A review is from someone who's been in your shoes telling you what their experience was. And I think when it comes to what content young people want to see, that's what we should be leading with. And I think authentic day in the life style videos talking about their actual experiences and like the classic sort of phrase like warts and all, that is actually what young people want to see. And I think this is where early careers teams are in a really challenging position, because we know that that's what our audience wants to see. But then obviously getting sign off from the business to have a really authentic, not glamorized video of a day in the life and talking about not just the benefits, but maybe some of the negatives as well, that can be a very tricky conversation. So I think that's going to be a problem we're going to have for a while. But I think it's one that it's great that it's being recognized more, so we can talk about how to do that.
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of those really in terms of it. It's a bravery to come out and do it first and foremost, and be consistent and be the first to go. There's reasons why employer brand is spoken very differently to brand for companies. Maybe there's an acceptance that actually your employer brand for early careers again is a subsection within that and needs to be addressed differently, and how we do it from there really, which is really key. The other bit I think is sometimes fear from companies. I've heard this before. I was at a round table a little while back and HMRC were there, and their challenge was how if we're authentic, it's people going through people's tax accounts and processing them. Sometimes it's a fear of your authenticity revealing that it's not sexy. There are
genuine
slides in
truth.
your face. It's not that, especially when how do you do that? So it's always trying to then find, well, what is it? Where is your USP and what is unique, and how do you bring that to the forefront? So I think fear has been another bit with some clients. As some maybe more than others have got the tools to be able to have that authenticity without almost creating something that isn't real at the same time, or feeling like you're being fraudulent with what you're doing.
And Sue, sorry,
sorry.
So just going to jump in from an apprenticeship perspective. I think often we look at these glossy videos that are very fancy. Actually, sometimes the language being used, going back to Tom's point, it's not what students understand. If you're 16 to 18, you spent the last 14 years in education. So you break things down by, is it maths-based, science-based, English-based, based on what you've been studying. So actually, I think another part of it is just simplifying it. Get rid of acronyms, get rid of internal language that you use, because they won't understand what credit risk is or procurement. I barely do, and I'm in my 30s. So like, making that language really simple, relating to what they've studied, because that will have a massive increase on engagement and uptake.
Thank you. So the last theme on our discussion was budget and resource, and actually a few of the points that I was going to make have been touched on in different ways by the panel anyway. So thankfully, as we chunder along with the agenda today, you don't need to listen to me for too much longer in terms of data and information, but I've split it into two aspects. So in terms of top tips around budget, it can be a little bit challenging. As I say, there's a large proportion of us have very small budgets to play with. So having a look at how you spend that budget is key. I can't influence the budget. And I think a lot of you probably don't feel that you can influence your own budgets as well. So let's have a think about ways in which you might best be able to spend that money. I concur entirely with Andrew in terms of being data driven. To create efficiency in your campaign, you have to understand not only where people have come from, but also where they might be, and choosing and selecting both media and universities alike based on your ambitions. So we create things like a university matrix, and we use a lot of the HESA data down to discipline level on some occasions across social mobility, disability, gender and ethnicity, to try and help inform employers where they should go rather than where they have been. And that is always a challenging conversation, because we have a lot of people say, well, we have a board member who is an alumni of XYZ, therefore they must be a great university, and we must attend. So it's always a bit of a balance. But I would definitely say use the data to determine what to underpin your strategic goals in terms of what you're trying to achieve, and generally creating a balance in the inventory that you are able to purchase with your budget that is the passive brand builders and targeting the authentic content that you're looking for. And we all know that you do need a certain number of applications. So some push activity that will drive your more challenging pipelines. If you're recruiting across 5 or 10 different schemes, you will probably all know that marketing is not going to present you with a huge challenge, but sales roles might. That engineering and women in tech, that has not been an issue that has gone away in the 12 years that I've been doing attraction. So making sure that you have a balance in your inventory, that you are dealing with some consistent messaging and insights, but also having some push activity to drive up applications in certain pipelines. And I suppose the last thing on budget is really around, and Chris stole my word, which is agility. We talk about it a lot at Amberjack in terms of attraction. So you can plan and anticipate what you're going to do. And I would say the UK has one of the most established markets in terms of graduates and early careers entry. And a lot of things haven't changed over the years. I could say 70 or 80% of things have been fairly consistent, and it's a case more of iteration than innovation a lot of the time. What you can't account for is student behaviour to external factors, and trying to anticipate that candidate behaviour. So I don't know that anybody anticipated that we'd have a huge spike in applications over COVID, and what was perceived to be a drop, but actually has been a progressive increase post the pandemic as well. But making sure that you have a campaign that is agile, taking what you know and building a campaign around 70-80% of that, but leaving enough to flex with what you're seeing as the pipeline builds and grows, and making sure that you are making those changes and responding to what is happening here and now in the market. We all agree budgets 12 months in advance. It doesn't account for what is happening on the day in the pipeline, month to month, and the challenges that you might have. So make sure that you try and leave yourself a bit of agility in there to swap and move either inventory or targeting around, or changing your targeting. Know that you're going to use something like I'll go old school for all the content we've just discussed, an email, but instead of actually defining what that is in September when you get started, define what it is in November when you're having to use it, and making sure that you're keeping that sort of up to date. I don't know on a budget front if anybody's got any particular other call outs. I think we've all pulled it into our conversations throughout the session so far. The other thing I wanted to have a little look at was resource. That's very challenging. We can't impact resource quite so easily. What I would say is if you are using external partners, and most of us on this call will be to some degree, whether that is a media source, whether it's a paid for media source or not a paid for media source. So, you know, the work that Amazing Apprenticeships do, for example, at this current point in time, they don't charge anybody any money for that partnership. A lot of the university work, there are not necessarily charges associated with a lot of that as well. But make sure that if you are partnering with external people to deliver this, it could be an organisation like Amberjack as well. But set expectations, be clear and transparent about what you can and can't do, be realistic in your goals, prioritise your strategy so that we can be efficient in your spend. But I would say monitor that activity regularly. It's not a beginning of the campaign setting a strategy in place and an end of campaign review. You should be doing it consistently throughout the campaign and making sure that everything is aligned with where you need it to be going to. But lean on your partners for advice, review their guidance, and be open to new ideas. I think, as Chris mentioned about being brave, you can always allocate 20% of your time and energy and budget to being brave and sticking with the 80%, you know, but having a think about how that might look across the whole campaign and being a bit more holistic in it. And don't be afraid to challenge your partners that you're working with and just say, I don't understand why this is happening. What can we do about it? These guys have been doing this activity for, I'm not going to mention any names, years and years and years and years. But they know the answers to a lot of stuff. And if they don't, they work with 20 or 30 other people who also know the answers to this. So really lean on them to try and get some help and advice. And if something doesn't look right, it probably isn't right. We've ended up with very little time for questions, but we did have a couple come in. One was for Rory regarding building student confidence. How do you recommend organisations build student confidence? Do you have examples of how we can do this?
Yeah, really good question. To borrow like an internal acronym we use is a WIFM. So it's a what's in it for me. So I think whenever you're faced with the opportunity to be face to face, whether it's in person or virtually with students, I think the way that we would advise building confidence is moving away from traditional presentations where ultimately there's nothing tangible they can take away. And we're advising and seeing more of a shift towards workshops where we can actually explain what transferable skills are, then also take them through exercises that will prepare them better for an assessment centre, an interview, or actually going into their work experience. So actual skills-based sessions are a really valuable way to help build confidence.
Thank you. And another question here for Chris, actually, regarding the delay for female applications, as we experience, or female applicants, is there a way we can encourage female applicants to apply earlier, or is this set to continue, and how can organisations respond to it? You're speaking for all women now, Chris, so.
No pressure. I might say nothing for fear of, no. I mean, it's been an issue for years, and I think there are still a lot of these kind of gender stereotypes in terms of these behaviours that happen. Even so, of our, I think it was 42% that hadn't started looking yet that we surveyed in March, 58% of those were female, or it was 58% for females. So it was definitely there. I know speaking to clients in terms of that. Also, we were made aware that males apply for more jobs than females as well. So there's that old adage, I think it's old ISE data from only a few years ago, that says like a male will apply if they meet 30 or 40% of the job requirement. A woman needs to meet more than 80% to make that. So I think there's that inclusivity. So use gender decoders where you can. Look at your language and what you use in terms of it. And bits of that is really key. And sometimes none of it's done with any intent. You use lovely words about competitive and stuff about your environment. They're very male gendered terms to be using, so try and shy away from that. The other bit is maybe try and front load any gender targeting at the beginning and the gender pushes. But if they're just not in the market early and haven't even entered it, that a lot of us as suppliers wouldn't even have their data yet to do a push. So maybe think about leaving enough left for a bit later in the campaign to try and make up any deficit from there. So like you were saying, so review, don't plan everything at the beginning, review where you're at, and then look at what inventory is available to you in order to make up particular shortfalls that you've got. The other bit, like I touched on before, is just you can't just achieve all of this in 1 year. So using these positive case studies correctly, which I think is another challenge I know clients have said, if they struggle for diversity, if they aim for authenticity, do they want to show a workforce that isn't very diverse whilst they're trying to do that? So again, be very considered about how you use gender or ethnicity case studies so that it doesn't then break all of that authenticity that you're trying to achieve as well. So not sure if that's a massive answer. It's just that it's something we've heard of for such a long time that just consider it when you take that into account. Don't having all your deadlines at the end of November could mean that you've just created a rod for your own backs when it comes to trying to be more gender diverse in future.
Brilliant. No, you're absolutely right. There's a long answer or long asked question in the chat to Andrew, which I'm going to field to you, which was around physical versus virtual events for students. So one of the team here is actually a recent graduate, and they have asked the question about, obviously they had to do online lectures and event attendance, and they would be interested to understand why there's been less interest in online, and do you see that fundamentally continuing and more of a return to physical? We have noticed with universities there is a real split between what people are offering this year in terms of virtual versus physical. I think everybody's put the big careers fairs back physical, but there's a lot of other things still happening virtually.
Yeah, and I think I touched a little bit on some reality versus perception here, and I've sort of been on a bit of a campaign over the last year to try and really understand. Plainly, what people are perceiving is that there is a lack of engagement in the virtual, but actually what we're seeing as a university, which is far more diversity of engagements in the virtual. So the overall numbers may not have looked as large as they did historically. And I think one of the challenges while we've all been virtual is you can't see what other people are doing in the same way. You know, one of the brilliant things about things like careers fairs and everyone else was whether they held value in an attraction campaign or not, or how tangible the KPIs around them were, you could see as an employer what all of your competitors were doing and benchmark against that. The challenge of virtual is you've got no clue how many people are talking to your competitor over there, how well they're doing in that virtual session that you've got no idea whether it's scheduled or not. And actually, I do think there's been a challenge, plainly. It's partly to do with some of the things around, you know, how we've had courses at universities that have been delayed in their start, which has had students fall out of the usual cycle. So they're not ready to be attracted at the same times in the same way because we've started them in January rather than September to try and mitigate the pandemic. Or we planned everything in from a careers perspective to be virtual when we anticipated last summer that the vast majority of the academic timetable was also going to be virtual with where we were. And what happened is more went back physical than we thought could go virtual, which meant we had then clashes with virtual stuff happening during the day at the same time as academic timetabling. And of course, we felt a reduction in the engagement therefore. So I think as we're moving forward, you'll find that a lot of the virtual stuff is now happening in evenings or in times outside of that core timetable or over lunch times. But there's certainly a place for it. And as I touched on, we talked about diversity and agility and all these other words today. You know, we might have had less overall students, but if you were an employer wanting to attract students from a variety of disciplines rather than just coming to one of our campuses where, you know, we had 2 faculty based, you can now reach a greater audience. If you want to reach more disabled students, more students from Black, Asian, diverse heritage backgrounds, they are engaging and have been engaging in the virtual in far greater depth than they ever were in the physical. So it's about really thinking about your numbers. And we don't talk about the overall numbers at King's anymore. We don't say X many hundred came to this fair. What we will tell you is what the gender split was historically, is what the career confidence levels of students was historically. Where were they on their journey? Are they ready to action their application, or are they still discovering what's out there? Because that's far more valuable data than actually telling you 700 students came. You never talk to 700 students anyway. You probably only talk to 10 or 12. And the reality is you probably still talk to 10 or 12 in the virtual too.
That's absolutely true. Something we discuss constantly, I think, when we're looking at these things. I'm conscious that we've reached the end of the session. James, I saw that you've asked a very interesting question, which I suspect will be of some interest to some people. So I can continue if you're still around. But if anybody else has places to be, I do just want to make sure that I say thank you to our panelists today. You guys have been absolutely amazing, and I hope that everybody has managed to take away at least one hint or tip in things that they might be able to implement in the short term, but maybe a lot more thoughts for what they might be able to implement in the longer term and improve. I don't want to see attraction in the top 5 list of challenges next year, if at all possible. But I can address James's question about global. So for anybody who can stay, please do feel free. But it's been great to see everybody today. If you are needing to drop off. Seeing a few people leave, but James, are you still there, or have you had to leave as well?
No, I'm here. Hello.
Ah, perfect. Hi, James.
Hi.
So James's question was something I'm interested in from the university side. Is what is a global market? Do the panel see any move towards a more connected recruitment strategy from larger multinational organisations who currently have quite siloed geographical attraction stroke recruitment teams? And I know there are other people on this call who would be interested in the answer to those questions as well, in terms of how do multinational organisations bring this together for it sounds like you have a particular challenge, James.
I do, yes. So I work for the University of London Career Service. We work with distance and flexible learners. So there's around 50,000 of them around the world, and there's about 3,500 or something in the UK. So, but one of the challenges we find in terms of employers is, say we have a number of students in Singapore, but also in Malaysia. So that's cool. They join up quite well. But if we want to run an event for our students, they're not all based there. So how do we? Yep. Oh, have I dropped out? Did I drop out there? Oh, okay. Everything froze for a second. So like, how do we sort of create? Hello, Andrew. How do we essentially create like a? If I want to get in touch with, let's say, HSBC in Singapore, yes, I can go directly to them, but then they bounce me back to London because I'm based in London, and then they bounce me back to Singapore, and then we eventually kind of get somewhere. But it takes quite a long time, and there's obviously different programs for different regions, but in some of these larger organizations, there's commonalities in the programs, and I don't see much sort of joined up response or conversation internally between those recruit teams. And this is historical, this has been going on for 20 odd years that I've been doing this sort of stuff. But yeah, so I was just interested in that, if the panel has any view on that, and if anyone's seeing any shift towards that.
We have a couple of clients. Susie, can I bring you to the fore in this discussion as well, just from a client point of view, who have local hiring stakeholders? So it's a global recruitment campaign that we will work with Susie and her team on. But the global element of it is definitely challenged. The UK market is by far the most established that we have come across. Yep. The US probably close behind, but different, it's fair to say, in terms of approach. Even within the US, they have 4 different models as to how they actually run their term times, so that becomes quite challenging when you're recruiting people. So it is challenging to have a central point of contact that has a central plan in terms of timelines, because if it's a UK based key contact, it tends to run September to August in terms of planning and activity, and that doesn't work for everybody. we find it challenging at Amberjack to reach out to overseas universities and get real partnership from them. That's also a challenge for us. And we probably don't do enough with student recruitment or international students through the university network in the UK. I think that's something that we could explore a little bit more. And by the sounds of it, you seem to have, quite a pool. And my guess is, Andrew, you and certainly the other London universities that you referred to have quite a pool of international students as well. Brexit has made life a little bit more challenging for a lot of our clients in terms of not accepting students who don't have the right to work or not able to progress them to the end goal as well. Is your challenge getting employers to talk to each other, or is your challenge getting other universities to talk to you?
Getting employers to talk to each other, to themselves, I think. Actually, is probably the issue. I think that's the fundamental issue, is the employers are not talking to themselves internally. There's siloed graduate recruitment teams, and Andrew and I have discussed this in the past as well. It's very there's a lack of joined up, which makes it as an institution where all of our students are fundamentally overseas. How do I pull together a program of activity or options for employers where they're talking to very different areas, and it's, as Andrew says in the chat there, it's about semantics and cultural norms come into this as well. There's different CV or recruitment processes in different countries. We see CVs from wildly different, so obviously the companies have this issue as well, but it's just some kind of joined up thinking. I just wonder if there's a way of us as people who talk to employers influencing them to talk to themselves.
Easier. I don't know if you can share a little about your own experiences of coordinating a global attraction campaign, a group recruitment campaign.
Yeah, so I work for IMI. We're an engineering business. We recruit globally. This year we've really struggled in APAC regions. So for example, China, we ended up closing the roles because the pandemic hit them again. Korea, we had one role to recruit in Korea and we just could not find the candidates. We've really had to rely on the local teams. We have regular calls with them. We call them pipeline calls, so we can see how many candidates are coming through the Amberjack process. We talk with Sue, we talk with the candidate management team on how to improve the attraction locally, but we really do rely, Sue, don't we, on that local knowledge, because one thing that might work in the UK just simply is difficult, or the cultural differences are totally different in Korea or Japan. For example, we've recruited in Japan this year as well. So for us, we do tap into that local knowledge and expect them to do a little bit of groundwork, as well as Sue doing the great work her and her team do as well, on different sort of job boards as well. But it really is tapping into what local universities they can recommend Sue sort of advertises on, and also just what local recruitment activities they can do on the ground as well. So it's been such a struggle this year, real huge struggle. But that's really my only. We also find candidates don't pick up the phone to our Amberjack team because from abroad, because it's an international phone number. So again, local conversations sometimes have to be had from the local teams. So it's a local number. Just those little challenges end up being quite huge in the scheme of things.
Quite expensive.
Yeah, definitely, and a lot of repetitive sort of work having to be done by Amberjack to try and get through to those candidates, because they just don't sometimes pick up the call. So for us, it's very much needing the local help. I'm based in the UK as well, so it's quite challenging, Sue, isn't it? Different countries that our wonderful company come up with that they want people based in, and it's just the odd one, like Singapore this year for an intern, for example. We've never recruited an intern in Singapore. Don't know how we're going to go about doing it, but we will have that candidate requirement, requirements gathering call with that local team to tap into their knowledge, and we go from there. Really,
it is communication. So we're fortunate that Susie doesn't know and identify with her stakeholders in each country. It's not that she has to go looking for who is responsible for it, etc. So that makes life a little bit easier, but it is the communication, as Susie says. We start with a kick-off call. We talk about what they know, what they don't know about the market, what they're looking for, what's acceptable, what's not, and then we start to map out how we might dovetail into it. But it is challenging because it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts. There's just small things that are constantly tackling. But I wonder if this might be a longer and a more interesting conversation, and I'd probably like to, Andrew's clearly got some thoughts on it as well, but maybe we can take this another time to talk about this, because international recruitment is something we see more clients, much like Susie and IMI, that have global markets and are looking for help from their UK team managing it. But how do we reach those other markets? And that is definitely a gap that could be addressed. So I'd be really interested in having a further conversation on that.
Yeah, really happy to follow up around that. That'd be interesting. Thank you, Andrew.
Perfect.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know I posted a couple of thoughts myself in the chat if anyone can still see it, but I think it's also about being smarter. We as a university can't be in every single market for the composition of international students we've got, even physically located in London, who want to go back to their home country or off to a third country, for example. But what we've started to realise is that we've got this breadth of academic partners who do joint programmes with us, or we send students off to do study abroad or whatever, who've also got their own career services, who are working locally with their own students. So actually, if we can find partnerships through the existing portfolio we've got, but find the career service concept, not only can we leverage the market intelligence about what's going on, but we can look to provide sort of experiential projects virtually online. So we're doing some stuff with University of New South Wales in Australia, University in Arizona at the moment, and King's, 3 completely different markets, but where we're bringing students together to do a project. And one of the byproducts of that is that students understand those markets and the access to different roles in those markets as well, even if we don't as a university understand it. So I think there's something about that, but it also means from the employer side, and I don't want to over pitch this potentially, but we can also, through your London or your UK teams, if you're going, well, we've got to set something up in Singapore, we've got no idea. Chances are that some of your university contacts in the UK have got an institutional partnership with a university in, say, Singapore, right? Who we can probably join you to the dots to someone on the ground working a careers team in university who can help you understand what their students in Singapore and what that market or that city's like. So I think it's about being smarter about the ecosystem we've got too.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, because we've got partners. A lot of our teaching is done by what are called recognised teaching centres in places like Singapore. So yeah, we talk to those teaching centres and they run careers events similar to what Andrew said. But yeah, it's about sort of trying to build that knowledge and leverage our relationships.
Definitely a conversation I'd like to have a bit more with you both if you've got some time in the coming weeks. Susie would like me to have a conversation with you both too, as well.
Yeah. Especially Singapore, that would be amazing.
Yeah. But thank you, Andrew, again, obviously, for your participation on the panel, James, for your question, and for everybody else who clearly didn't have to drop off and was listening in, but it's much appreciated. I hope that you've enjoyed the session, and I hope that we speak and see you all soon.
Thanks, Sue.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Hello. Are you there?
I am. Sorry, I'm just putting my camera back on.
Did you nod off?
No, that was brilliant.
Oh, actually,
Really
do you
good.
want to stop the recording?
Yeah, no, I thought that was great, Sue. I thought all the panelists were ace. I thought they'd all